There is a silence that lives in some buildings. It is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that has consumed it. In the summer of 1991, apartment 213 of the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was drowning in such a silence. It was a quiet born of chemicals and decay, a stillness that had methodically swallowed the lives of 17 young men and boys. Behind the door lived a man whose loneliness had metastasized, transforming from a private ache into an all-consuming predator. His name was Jeffrey Dahmer, and his apartment was not a home. It was a museum of the dead, a laboratory of possession, a final desperate answer to a terror of being left alone. How does a human being become a void? At what point does the soul fracture, leaving behind only a meticulous, methodical engine of destruction? Was the monster born in the quiet suburbs of Ohio, nurtured by parental discord and a profound sense of invisible alienation? Or was it created by a society that looked away, that failed to hear the screams because they came from voices it had already decided were unimportant? The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is not merely a chronicle of murder. It is an autopsy of failure, the failure of a family to see, of a community to notice, and of a system to protect. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. How many horrors are unfolding right now, shielded from view by nothing more than a closed door and our own polite indifference? Before the world knew his name, before the stench from his apartment became the smell of a city's shame, the final number was already set. 17 lives, each with a past and a future, were systematically erased. For 13 years, a ghost walked among the living, his pathology growing more demanding with each passing year. This is the story of how that ghost took form, how it hunted in the lonely spaces of society, and how, for far too long, no one saw the trail of bones he left in his wake. It is a testament to the chilling truth that the most terrifying monsters are not those who lurk in the shadows, but those who smile, nod, and offer you a drink, all while hiding a graveyard behind their eyes. The nightmare began in the deceptive tranquility of a middle-class American childhood. Born in 1960, Jeffrey Dahmer grew up in a home that from the outside mirrored the aspirations of its era. Yet within its walls, a quiet tension simmered. The marriage of his parents, Lionel and Joyce, was a landscape of conflict, of arguments that filled the house with an unspoken anxiety. Joyce struggled with her own mental health, prone to depression and volatility, while Lionel, a chemist, was often emotionally distant, retreating into his work. Young Jeffrey became an island in this turbulent sea, a quiet, undemanding child who learned early to retreat into the intricate worlds inside his own head. He felt a growing sense of otherness, a disconnect he could not name but which set him apart from his peers. The first true marker of his psychological divergence came after a double hernia surgery at the age of 4. The experience left him with a vague but persistent feeling of being altered, of something essential having been taken from him. As he entered adolescence, this internal strangeness sought an external expression. While other boys were discovering sports and girls, Jeffrey was discovering death. He became fascinated by the hidden mechanics of life, collecting roadkill, squirrels, cats, dogs, not with the morbid curiosity of a child, but with the focused intensity of a researcher. He wanted to see what was inside. In the woods behind his home, he built a private world where he could indulge this obsession, dissecting the animals, bleaching their bones, and studying the architecture of their skeletons. It was a search for answers, a way to understand the tangible structures of life in a world where emotions felt abstract and threatening. The family home in Bath, Ohio, became the incubator. It was a place of sufficient isolation, a suburban house buffered by trees, granting him the privacy his burgeoning obsessions required. The basement and a small shed in the yard became his first laboratories. Here, The boundary between scientific curiosity and something far darker began to dissolve. He learned about chemical preservation, using formaldehyde to keep his specimens. This was the nascent stage of his ultimate fantasy: to preserve, to possess, to stop the process of decay and departure. He was not just studying bones, he was practicing the art of keeping things with him forever. The first definitive sign, the act that severed his future from any semblance of normalcy, occurred in the summer of 1978. He was 18, a recent high school graduate. His mother had left his father, taking his younger brother with her, and his father had moved into a motel pending the finalization of their divorce. For weeks, Jeffrey Dahmer lived alone in the empty house, a ghost in his own life story. On June 18th, he picked up a young hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. He lured him back to the house with the promise of beer and music. For a few hours, there was companionship. But when Hicks wanted to leave, a primal panic seized Dahmer. The fear of being abandoned once more was intolerable. In a sudden, impulsive act of violence, he struck Hicks with a dumbbell and then strangled him. The Rubicon was crossed. The fantasy of complete possession had been realized through murder. The immediate aftermath was not remorse, but a problem of logistics. He dismembered the body in the crawl space, the first of many to come, dissolving the flesh in acid and scattering the pulverized bones in the woods. The conditions that allowed this pathology to flourish were a perfect storm of personal and societal neglect. The parental abandonment left him rudderless at a critical moment, alone in the very house that had become his workshop of death. His escalating alcoholism, which began in his early teens, served as both a social lubricant and a potent disinhibitor, dulling the anxieties that drove him and blurring the moral lines he was beginning to cross. Later, after a failed stint in the army and a period of aimless drifting, he moved in with his grandmother in West Allis. Her home provided a sanctuary. She gave him a place to live, a sense of stability, but her conventional piety and perhaps a willful desire not to see the darkness in her grandson created a shield. She complained about the smells from the basement and the strange men he brought home, but she never forced a confrontation. And beyond the family, a broader societal indifference provided the final layer of camouflage. His victims were often gay men, many of them minorities. In the climate of the 1980s, their lives were devalued, their disappearances less likely to be investigated with urgency. Dahmer, a quiet, unassuming white man, moved through this world like a predator in plain sight, protected by the very prejudices of the society he exploited. After the impulsive horror of his first murder, Dahmer's homicidal compulsions lay dormant for 9 years. This long interval was not a period of healing, but of gestation. His internal chaos was externalized through alcoholism, leading to his discharge from the army and a series of failed jobs. The move to his grandmother's house in 1981 marked a new phase. It was under her roof, in the privacy of her basement, that the killer's routine was forged. The pattern emerged slowly at first, then with accelerating frequency. He would stalk the city's gay bars and bathhouses, hunting not for connection but for victims. He became an expert at projecting a harmless, slightly pathetic loneliness that drew in sympathetic men. The promise was always simple: money for posing for photos or just a few drinks back at his place. The goal was singular: to get them to a place where he held absolute control. The machinery of his evil was both primitive and chillingly methodical. Once a victim was lured back to the house on South 84th Street, the process began. Dahmer would lace their drink with a powerful sedative, often a crushed prescription sleeping pill like Halcyon. As the drug took hold, his fantasy of total control could be enacted. He killed almost exclusively by strangulation, a method that was intimate, quiet, and left the body largely intact for his post-mortem explorations. After death, the true work began. his basement became an abattoir. Using saws and knives acquired with unnerving normalcy from local hardware stores, he would systematically dismember the bodies. His actions were guided by a cold, pseudo-scientific curiosity. He photographed every stage of the process, creating a grotesque archive of his work. These Polaroids were not just trophies, they were reference materials, a way to relive and perfect his rituals. This ritualistic dismemberment served a dual purpose. It was a practical necessity for disposal, but more importantly, it was the ultimate act of deconstruction and possession. He boiled the flesh from the bones, preserving skulls and skeletons as permanent trophies. These were the companions who could never leave him. In the most horrifying extension of his pathology, he attempted to create a living, compliant partner, a zombie. He would drill holes into the skulls of his sedated but still living victims, injecting hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains. These experiments were a desperate, insane attempt to destroy the victim's will, to extinguish the part of them that could choose to walk away. They always failed, resulting in the victim's death and leaving Dahmer once again with the one thing he feared most: a dead body and the looming certainty of being alone. The psychological landscape of Jeffrey Dahmer was a barren wasteland of isolation. His every horrific act was a perverted attempt to fill this void. He did not kill out of rage or hatred, he killed out of a desperate pathological fear of abandonment. For him, the moment a man decided to leave was a moment of existential panic, a reenactment of every rejection he had ever felt. Murder was the only way he knew to stop that moment from happening. By killing them, he could keep them. He could possess them completely, exploring their physical forms in a way he was incapable of connecting with their living consciousness. He compartmentalized his life with chilling efficiency. He was a quiet worker at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Company, a polite neighbor, a dutiful grandson. But this facade was a thin crust over a roiling core of obsession and compulsion, a duality maintained by a constant heavy intake of alcohol that numbed him to the enormity of his own actions. During his years of activity, the truth nearly surfaced on several occasions. Moments of near discovery that stand as haunting testaments to systemic failure. In September 1988, he was arrested for sexual assault after a 13-year-old Laotian boy, Konarak Sintha Somphon's older brother, reported being drugged and molested by him. Dahmer received a shockingly lenient sentence of 1 year in a work release program. The system had him in its grasp and let him go. The most catastrophic failure came 3 years later, in May 1991. Konarak Sintha Somphon, now 14, stumbled out of Dahmer's apartment building, naked, bleeding, and incoherent. 3 concerned black women found him and called the police. When the officers arrived, Dahmer calmly explained that the boy was his 19-year-old lover and they had simply had a drunken argument. The police, accepting the word of a calm white man over the frantic pleas of 3 black women, escorted the boy back into apartment 213. They left him there to die. One officer even radioed back, "My partner and I will be back in service from this intoxicated Asian naked male." An hour later, Konarak was dead. A single diligent inquiry would have revealed Dahmer's prior conviction for molesting the boy's brother. But that inquiry was never made. The zenith of horror occurred in the cramped, foul-smelling confines of apartment 213 at 924 North 25th Street. After being asked to leave his grandmother's house in 1990 due to the suspicious smells and activities, Dahmer moved into his own place. This newfound independence removed the last fragile barrier to his compulsions. The period between 1990 and his capture in July 1991 was a frenzy of murder. He killed at least 12 men and boys in that apartment in just over a year. The pace became frantic, the rituals more compressed. He was losing control, no longer able to manage the logistics of his gruesome hobby. The apartment became a tomb. Body parts filled his freezer and refrigerator. A 57-gallon drum of acid sat in his living room, slowly dissolving human remains. Skulls were boiled clean on his stove and arranged in a closet as a makeshift shrine. He was living, eating, and sleeping surrounded by the evidence of his crimes. Yet to his neighbors, he was just the quiet, solitary man who sometimes had loud arguments with guests and whose apartment emitted a terrible, unidentifiable stench. The victims of this final bloody chapter were the invisible men of the city. They were young, often poor, and predominantly men of color, Black, Latino, and Southeast Asian. Men like Anthony Hughes, who was 31 and deaf, a kind soul known in the local gay community. He met Dahmer at a bar, and because he could not hear, he communicated with notes. One of his last notes reportedly read, "I'm lonely." He disappeared in May 1991. His skull was one of those found in Dahmer's apartment. There was Matt Turner, 20, Ernest Miller, 22, David Thomas, 23. Each was a life, a collection of hopes and relationships, reduced to a component in a serial killer's private obsession. Dahmer preyed upon them precisely because their social status made them vulnerable. He knew their disappearances were less likely to provoke a swift and thorough police investigation. They were ghosts in the city long before he made them so. Society did not just look away. In many instances, it actively facilitated the horror through a toxic combination of prejudice and indifference. The police response to the Chronicle synthesomphone incident was the most egregious example. The officer's decision was colored by both racism and homophobia. They saw a dispute between two gay men and dismissed the clear evidence of distress from a child, siding with the seemingly rational adult. The repeated calls from neighbor Glenda Cleveland were another indictment of the system. She and her family made numerous calls to the police about the horrifying smell and the sounds of power tools at odd hours coming from apartment 213. She even tried to follow up on the synthesomphone incident, convinced something was terribly wrong. She was consistently dismissed and ignored. Her voice, the voice of a concerned Black woman in a low-income neighborhood, carried no weight. The monster in apartment 213 was allowed to continue his slaughter because the systems designed to protect the community failed to value the lives of his victims or the warnings of their neighbors. By the summer of 1991, the external pressures on Dahmer's secret world were beginning to mount, however imperceptibly. The growing number of missing young men from Milwaukee's minority and gay communities had not yet been formally linked, but whispers of a predator were starting to circulate. Families were pressuring the police, frustrated by the lack of progress and the dismissive attitude they often encountered. The sheer volume of disappearances was creating a statistical anomaly that sooner or later someone would have to notice. While no organized investigation was closing in on him, the ambient temperature of suspicion in the communities he hunted was slowly rising. The more immediate threat came from within. The accelerating pace of his killings was a symptom of his psychological unraveling. The compulsion had become a ravenous, insatiable beast, and he was its exhausted servant. He was drinking more heavily than ever, becoming sloppy and reckless. The careful, methodical killer who had once operated with patience was gone, replaced by a man frantically trying to manage the gruesome logistics of his addiction. He ran out of space in his freezer. The acid vat was a slow and imperfect disposal method. He was bringing new victims back to the apartment while the remains of others were still present. A high-risk gamble born of desperation. His confidence tipped into arrogance, believing himself untouchable after evading suspicion for so long, especially after the police had literally handed a victim back to him. The internal structure of his double life was collapsing under its own grotesque weight. The final breakthrough came not from detective work, but from the will to survive of one potential victim. On the night of July 22, 1991, Dahmer lured 32-year-old Tracy Edwards back to his apartment. The routine began as usual, but this time something was different. Dahmer seemed more agitated, more overtly menacing. He snapped a handcuff onto one of Edward's wrists, brandished a large knife, and led him into the bedroom, where he spoke of his intention to eat Edward's heart. Staring into the face of certain death, with the stench of the apartment filling his lungs, Edward saw his chance. Feigning compliance, he waited for a moment of distraction, then punched Dahmer and fled for his life, one handcuff still dangling from his wrist. He burst out into the street and flagged down a passing police patrol car. He told the officers a weirdo had pulled a knife on him and tried to restrain him. The breakthrough was not a clue. It was a survivor running for his life, leading the law directly to the monster's door. When police officers Robert Routh and Rolf Meller accompanied Tracy Edwards back to apartment 213, they stepped across a threshold into a real-world nightmare. The first thing that hit them was the smell, an overpowering chemical-laced stench of death that defied description. Dahmer was initially cooperative, but when one officer spotted a large knife under the bed, the situation escalated. As they went to retrieve the handcuff key, Officer Muller opened a nightstand drawer. Inside were the Polaroid photographs. He flipped through them in stunned silence. Images of human bodies in various stages of dismemberment posed in grotesque arrangements. The scope of the horror was laid bare in an instant. A quick search of the apartment confirmed the unbelievable. An officer opened the refrigerator and found a freshly severed human head. The quiet apartment was revealed to be a slaughterhouse. Dahmer, realizing the game was over, attempted to resist but was quickly subdued. His last words before being taken into custody were chillingly calm and resigned. "For what I did, I should be dead." The forensic accounting that followed was a descent into hell. Hazmat-suited investigators spent days meticulously dismantling the charnel house Dahmer had created. They cataloged the remains of 11 separate individuals within the apartment. They found 4 heads in the kitchen, 7 skulls in a closet, 2 human hearts, and a section of arm muscle in the freezer, and an entire torso along with other body parts dissolving in the 57-gallon drum of acid. The Polaroids became a crucial piece of evidence, a horrifying roadmap to his crimes that allowed investigators to link the dismembered remains to missing persons. Dahmer himself, now in custody, provided a full and detailed confession. In a series of interviews, he recounted 13 years of murder with a flat, emotionless affect, describing his methods, his motives, and the fates of his 17 victims with a clarity that shocked even the most hardened. Detectives. The trial of Jeffrey Dahmer in 1992 was a piece of public theater focused not on the question of his guilt, which was undeniable, but on the state of his soul. His defense team entered a plea of guilty but insane, arguing that his acts were the product of necrophilia and other paraphilias so powerful that they constituted a mental disease, rendering him incapable of conforming his conduct to the law. They painted a picture of a man driven by compulsions he could not control. The prosecution countered with a portrait of a cunning, organized predator who made deliberate choices. They pointed to the steps he took to lure victims, evade detection, and dispose of evidence as proof that he understood the wrongful nature of his acts. After weeks of disturbing testimony, the jury sided with the prosecution. They found Jeffrey Dahmer to be sane and legally responsible for his actions. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would die in prison. A 16th life sentence was added later for his first murder in Ohio. The legal reckoning was complete, but for the community, the process of understanding had just begun. For the families of the 17 victims, the trial's verdict offered little solace. Their grief was compounded by a searing anger at the systemic failures that had allowed Dahmer to kill with impunity for so long. The family of Konarak Synthasamphone in particular became a symbol of this righteous fury. their personal tragedy a public indictment of a police force that had failed to protect their child. The lone survivor of that final night, Tracy Edwards, became a reluctant hero, but the trauma of his escape haunted him for the rest of his life, a stark reminder that even for those who get away, the encounter with pure evil leaves an indelible scar. The city of Milwaukee itself was left to grapple with its own reflection in the mirror Dahmer held up, forced to confront the deep-seated issues of racism, homophobia, and official neglect that his crimes had so brutally exposed. The aftermath brought intense scrutiny upon the Milwaukee Police Department. The two officers who returned Conorak's synthesophone to Dahmer were fired, becoming scapegoats for a wider departmental failure. In a move that shocked and angered the community, however, they were later reinstated with full back pay by a judge's ruling. This decision was seen by many as the ultimate proof of a system unwilling to hold itself accountable. In an effort to cleanse the physical stain of the crimes, the Oxford Apartments building was purchased by a community development organization in 1992 and demolished. The ground was leveled, the space turned into a vacant lot, a literal and symbolic attempt to erase a landmark of profound human suffering. But the absence of the building became its own kind of memorial, a void where a monument to horror once stood. Jeffrey Dahmer's name quickly transcended the facts of his case to become a permanent fixture in the cultural lexicon of evil. His story has been endlessly retold in books, television shows, and films, his motives and psychology endlessly dissected. This fascination often veered into a morbid celebrity, transforming him into a dark archetype, the cannibalistic serial killer that threatened to eclipse the memory of the men he murdered. He became a case study, a monster under a microscope, his humanity, however warped, often analyzed with more interest than the humanity of those he destroyed. He represents a specific modern kind of horror, the unassuming monster next door whose placid exterior conceals an abyss. What then is the final lesson of this grim chapter? It is a story that warns us about the terrifying power of loneliness when it curdles into a solipsistic pathology, a need so profound that it consumes the lives of others to feel less alone. It is a stark reminder that the banality of evil is not just a philosophical concept. It is a man working at a chocolate factory who goes home to dismantle a human body. Most importantly, Dahmer's legacy is an indictment of indifference. He was able to operate for over a decade because he hunted on the margins of society, targeting those whose lives were deemed less valuable by the system sworn to protect them. The final moral is a call to vigilance, a demand that we listen to the voices of the concerned, that we see the humanity in the vulnerable, and that we never again allow the quiet facade of a neighbor to mask a silence that consumes lives. Have we learned to look past the door? What do we truly owe the 17 men and boys who died because for 13 years the world chose not to?